Hello and welcome to this session on empiricism. Is your knowledge based on your experience, or is your knowledge based on what others have told you? There are a number of philosophical beliefs about life and experience. Some philosophies suggest that knowledge must be proven, while other philosophies suggest that it is based on reasoning. Empiricism is a theory that states that knowledge comes only or primarily from sensory experience. One of the several views of epistemology, that is the study of human knowledge, along with rationalism and skepticism, empiricism emphasizes the role of experience and evidence, especially sensory experience, in the formation of ideas or the notion of innate ideas or traditions. Empiricists may argue, however, that traditions or customs arise due to relations of previous sense experiences. Empiricism in the philosophy of science emphasizes evidences, especially as discovered in experiments. It is a fundamental part of the scientific method that all hypotheses and theories must be tested against observations of the natural world rather than resting solely on a priori reasoning, intuition, or revelation. Empiricism, often used by natural scientists, says that knowledge is based on experience and that knowledge is tentative and probabilistic, subject to continued revision and falsification. One of the epistemological tenets is that sensory experience creates knowledge. The scientific method, including experiments and validated measurement tools, guides empirical research. Etymology. The English term empirical derives from the Greek word, which is cognate with and translates to the Latin experientia, from which we derive the word experience and the related word experiment. The term was used by the empiric school of ancient Greek medical practitioners who rejected the three doctrines of the dogmatic school, preferring to rely on the observation of phenomena. Empirical method. A central concept in science and the scientific method is that it must be empirically based on the evidence of the senses. Both natural and social sciences use working hypotheses that are testable by observation and experiment. The term semi-empirical is sometimes used to describe theoretical methods that make use of basic axioms, established scientific laws, and previous experimental results in order to engage in recent model building and theoretical inquiry. Philosophical empirics hold no knowledge to be properly inferred or deduced unless it is derived from one's sense-based experience. This view is commonly contrasted with rationalism, which states that knowledge may be derived from reason independently of the senses. For example, John Locke held that some knowledge, like the knowledge of the God's existence, could be arrived at through intuition and reasoning alone. Similarly, Robert Boyle, a prominent advocate of the experimental method, held that we have innate ideas. The main continental rationalists like Descartes, Spinoza, and Leibniz were advocates of the empirical scientific method. Early empiricism. The notion of tabula rasa, which means clean slate or blank tablet, connotes a view of mind as originally a blank or empty recorder. Locke uses the word white paper, on which experience leaves marks. This denies that humans have innate ideas. The image dates back to Aristotle, who said that what the mind or the nervous thinks must be in it, in the same sense as letters are on a tablet or grammation, which bears no actual writing, or grammanon. This is just what happens in the case of the mind. Aristotle's explanation of how this was possible was not strictly empiricist in a modern sense, but rather based on his theory of potentiality and actuality, and experience of sense perception still requires the help of the active nervous. These notions contrasted with Platonic notions of the human mind as an entity that pre-existed somewhere in the heavens before being sent down to join a body on earth. Aristotle was considered to give a more important position to sense perception than Plato, and commentators in the Middle Ages summarize one of his positions as nothing in the intellect without first being in the senses. This idea was later developed in ancient philosophy by the Stoic school. Stoic epistemology generally emphasizes that the mind starts blank but acquires knowledge as the outside world is impressed upon it. The doxographer Aetius summarizes this view as, when a man is born, the Stoics say he has a commanding part of his soul, like a sheet of paper ready for writing upon. Later Stoics, such as Sextus of Chaeronea, would continue the idea of empiricism in later Stoic writings as well. As Sextus contends, for every thought comes from sense perception or not without sense perception, and either from direct experience or not without direct experience. During the Middle Ages, Aristotle's theory of Tabula Rasa was developed by Islamic philosophers, starting with Al-Farabi, developing into an elaborate theory by Avicenna and demonstrated as a thought experience by Ibn Tufayl. For Avicenna or Ibn Sina, for example, the Tabula Rasa is a pure potentiality that is actualized through education, and knowledge is attained through empirical familiarity with objects in this world from which one abstracts universal concepts, which is later developed through a syllogistic method of reasoning, in which observations lead to propositional statements which, when compounded, lead to further abstract concepts. The intellectual self develops from a material intellect known as al-aql al-hayulani, which is a potentiality that can acquire knowledge, to the active intellect known as al-aql al-fa'il, the state of the human intellect in conjunction with the perfect source of knowledge. So the immaterial active intellect, separate from any individual person, is still essential for understanding to occur. In the 12th century BC, the Andalusian Muslim philosopher and novelist Abu Bakr ibn Tufayl, also known as Abu Bakr or Ibn Tufayl in the West, included the theory of Tabula Rasa as a thought experiment in his Arabic philosophical novel called Hayy ibn Yaqdhan, in which he depicted the development of the mind of a feral child from a tabula rasa to that of an adult in complete isolation from society on a desert island through experience alone. The Latin translation of his philosophical novel, which is entitled Philosophical Autodidactus, which was published by Edward Pocock the Younger in 1671, had an influence on John Locke's formulation of Tabula Rasa in his work An Essay Concerning Human Understanding. A similar Islamic theological novel called Theologus Autodidactus was written by the Arab theologian and physician Ibn al-Nafis in the 13th century. It also dealt with the theme of empiricism through the story of a feral child on a desert island, but departed from its predecessor by depicting the development of the protagonist's mind through contact with society rather than in isolation from society. During the 13th century, Thomas Aquinas adopted the Aristotelian position that the senses are essential to mind into scholasticism. Bonaventure, one of Aquinas' strongest intellectual opponents, offered some of the strongest arguments in favor of the Platonic idea of the mind. The decidedly anti-Aristotelian and anti-clerical music theorist Vincenzo Galilei, father of Galileo and the inventor of monody, made use of the method in successfully solving musical problems. Firstly, of tuning such as a relationship of pitch to string tension and mass in stringed instruments, and to volume of air in wind instruments. And secondly, to composition by his various suggestions to composers in his Dialogo della musica antica e moderna. The Italian word he used for experiment was experienza. It is known that he was the essential pedagogical influence upon the young Galileo, his eldest son, arguably one of the most influential empiricists in history. Vincenzo, through his tuning research, found the underlying truth at the heart of the misunderstood myth of Pythagoras' hammers, which states that the square of the numbers concerned yielded those musical intervals, not the actual numbers as believed. And through this and other discoveries that demonstrated the fallibility of traditional authorities, a radically empirical attitude developed, passed on to Galileo, which regarded experience and demonstration as the sine qua non of valid rational inquiry. British Empiricism. British Empiricism, though it was not a term used at the time, derives from the 17th century period of early modern philosophy and modern science. The term became useful in order to describe differences perceived between two of its founders, Francis Bacon, described as empiricist, and René Descartes, who is described as a rationalist. Thomas Hobbes and Baruch Spinoza in the next generation are often also described as empiricists and rationalists respectively. John Locke, George Berkeley and David Hume were the primary exponents of empiricism in the 18th century Enlightenment, with Locke being the person who is normally known as the founder of empiricism as such. In response to the early to mid-17th century continental rationalism, John Locke proposed in his work An Essay Concerning Human Understanding in 1689 a very influential view wherein the only knowledge humans can have is a posteriori, that is, based upon experience. Locke is famously attributed with holding the proposition that the human mind is a tabula rasa, which means a blank tablet, or in Locke's words, a white paper, on which the experiences derived from sense impressions as a person's life proceeds are written. There are two sources of our ideas, sensation and reflection. In both cases, a distinction is made between simple and complex ideas. The former are unanalyzable and are broken down into primary and secondary qualities. Primary qualities are essential for the object in question to be what it is. Without specific primary qualities, an object would not be what it is. For example, an apple is an apple because of the arrangement of its atomic structure. If an apple was structured differently, it would cease to be an apple. Secondary qualities are the sensory information we can perceive from its primary qualities. For example, an apple can be perceived in various colors, sizes, and textures, but it is still identified as an apple. Therefore, its primary qualities dictate what the object essentially is, while its secondary qualities define its attributes. Complex ideas combine simple ones and divide into substances, modes, and relations. According to Locke, our knowledge of things is a perception of ideas that are in accordance or discordance with each other, which is very different from the quest for certainty of Descartes. A generation later, the Irish Anglican bishop George Berkeley determined that Locke's view immediately opened a door that would eventually lead to atheism. In response to Locke, he put forth in his treatise concerning the principles of human knowledge, written in 1710, an important challenge to empiricism in which things only exist either as a result of their being perceived or by virtue of the fact that they are an entity doing the perceiving. For Berkeley, God fills in for humans by doing the perceiving whenever humans are not around to do it. In his text, Alciphron, Berkeley maintained that any order humans may see in nature is a language or handwriting of God. Berkeley's approach to empiricism would later come to be called subjective idealism. The Scottish philosopher David Hume responded to Berkeley's criticism of Locke, as well as other differences between early modern philosophers, and moved empiricism to a new level of skepticism. Hume argued, in keeping with the empiricist view, that all knowledge derives from sense experience, but he accepted that this has implications not normally acceptable to philosophers. He wrote, for example, Mr. Locke divides all arguments into demonstrative and probable. In his view, we must say that it is only probable all men must die, or that the sun will rise tomorrow. And he also wrote, Mr. Locke, in his chapter of Power, says that, finding from experience that there are several new productions in nature, and concluding that there must somewhere be a power capable of producing them, we arrive at last by this reasoning at the idea of power. But no reasoning can ever give us a new, original, simple idea, as this philosopher himself confesses. This, therefore, can never be the origin of that idea. Hume divided all of human knowledge into two categories: relations of ideas and matters of fact. Mathematical and logical propositions, example, that the square of the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares of the two sides, are examples of the first, while propositions involving some contingent observation of the world, for example, the sun rises in the east, are examples of the second. All of the people's ideas, in turn, are derived from their impressions. For Hume, an impression corresponds roughly with what we call a sensation. To remember or to imagine such impressions is to have an idea. Ideas are therefore the faint copies of sensations. David Hume's empiricism led to numerous philosophical schools. Hume maintained that all knowledge, even the most basic beliefs about the natural world, cannot be conclusively established by reason. Rather, he maintained our beliefs are more a result of accumulated habits developed in response to accumulated sense experiences. Among his many arguments, Hume also added another important slant to the debate about scientific method, that of the problem of induction. Hume argued that it requires inductive reasoning to arrive at the premises for the principle of inductive reasoning, and therefore the justification for inductive reasoning is a circular argument. Among Hume's conclusions regarding the problem of induction is that there is no certainty that the future will resemble the past. Thus, as a simple instance posed by Hume, we cannot know with certainty by inductive reasoning that the sun will continue to rise in the east, but instead come to expect it to do so because it has repeatedly done so in the past. Hume concluded that such things as belief in an external world and belief in the existence of the self were not rationally justifiable. According to Hume, these beliefs were to be accepted nonetheless because of their profound basic instinct and custom. Hume's lasting legacy, however, was a doubt that his skeptical arguments cast on the legitimacy of inductive reasoning, allowing many skeptics who followed to cast similar doubt. Phenomenalism, logical empiricism, pragmatism, and rationalism. Phenomenalism. Most of Hume's followers have disagreed with his conclusion that belief in an external world is rationally unjustifiable, contending that Hume's own principles implicitly contained the rational justification for such a belief, that is, beyond being content to let the issue rest on human instinct, custom, and habit. According to an extreme empiricist theory known as phenomenalism, anticipated by the arguments of both Hume and George Berkeley, a physical object is a kind of construction out of our experiences. Phenomenalism is a view that physical objects, properties, events, whatever is physical, are reducible to mental objects, properties, and events. Ultimately, only mental objects, properties, events exist. Hence, the closely related term, subjective idealism. By the phenomenalistic line of thinking, to have a visual experience of a real physical thing is to have an experience of a certain kind of group of experiences. This type of set of experiences possesses a consistency and coherence that is lacking in the set of experiences of which hallucinations, for example, are a part. As John Stuart Mill put it in the mid-19th century, matter is the permanent possibility of sensation. Mill's empiricism went a significant step beyond Hume in still another respect, in maintaining that induction is necessary for all meaningful knowledge, including mathematics. Logical empiricism. Logical empiricism was an early 20th century attempt to synthesize the essential ideas of British empiricism. Example, a strong emphasis on sensory experience as the basis for knowledge, with certain insights from mathematical logic that had been developed by Gottlob Frege and Ludwig Wittgenstein. Some of the key figures in this movement were Otto Neurath, Moritz Schlick, and the rest of the Vienna Circle, along with A.J. Ayer, Rudolf Carnap, and Hans Reichenbach. The neo-positivists subscribed to a notion of philosophy as the conceptual clarification of the methods, insights, and discoveries of the sciences. They saw in the logical symbolism elaborated by Frege and Bertrand Russell a powerful instrument that could rationally reconstruct all scientific discourse into an ideal, logically perfect language that would be free of the ambiguities and deformations of natural language. This gave rise to what they saw as metaphysical pseudo-problems and other conceptual confusions. By combining Frege's thesis that all mathematical truths are logical with the early Wittgenstein's idea that all logical truths are mere linguistic tautologies, they arrived at a twofold classification of all propositions: the analytic or the priori and the synthetic or a posteriori. On this basis, they formulated a strong principle of demarcation between sentences that have sense and those that do not, the so-called verification principle. Any sentence that is not purely logical or is unverifiable is devoid of meaning. As a result, most metaphysical, ethical, aesthetic, and other traditional philosophical problems came to be considered pseudo-problems. Pragmatism. In the late 19th and early 20th century, several forms of pragmatic philosophy arose. The ideas of pragmatism, in its various forms, developed mainly from discussions that took place while Charles Sanders Peirce and William James were both at Harvard in the 1870s. James popularized the term pragmatism, giving Peirce full credit for its patrimony, but Peirce later demurred from the tangents that the movement was taking and redubbed what he regarded as the original idea with the name of pragmaticism. Along with its pragmatic theory of truth, this perspective integrates the basic insights of empirical or experience-based and rational or concept-based thinking. Empiricism versus rationalism. The empiricists. Empiricists share the view that there is no such thing as innate knowledge and that instead knowledge is derived from experience, either sense via the five senses or reasoned via the brain or mind. Locke, Berkeley, and Hume are empiricists, although they have very different views about metaphysics. The rationalists. The rationalists share the view that there is innate knowledge. They differ in that they choose different objects of innate knowledge. Plato is a rationalist because he thinks that we have innate knowledge of the forms, mathematical objects and concepts like triangles, equality, largeness, and moral concepts like goodness, beauty, virtue, piety, and possibly color. He does not ever explicitly state that they are forms of colors. Descartes thinks that the idea of God, or perfection and infinity, and knowledge of my own existence is innate. G.W. Leibniz thinks that logical principles are innate. And Noam Chomsky thinks that the ability to use language, example language rules, is innate. Now you can try to answer the following questions. Write a short note on the influences and impact of empiricism in the modern world of thought. Discuss the theoretical contributions of the empiricists. Explain the epistemological features of empiricism. Who are the empiricists and what did they teach? Write a short note on empiricist thoughts. What are the central themes of empiricist philosophy? Analyze the empiricist concept posteriori knowledge. Hope that you may go through the reference books for better understanding. The Legacy of Logical Positivism, Studies in the Philosophy of Science by Stephen F. Baker and Peter Ackenstein, published in 1969 by Johns Hopkins University Press, Baltimore. The Problem of Empiricism from the Journal of Philosophy by R. Chisholm in 1948. A Treatise of Human Nature by D. Hume in 1975, published by the Oxford University Press, London. Challenges to Empiricism by H. Morrick in 1980, published by Hackett Publishing, Indianapolis. The Heritage of Logical Positivism by Nicholas Rescher in 1985, published by the University Press of America, Lanham. Thank you for watching this program. We can meet again with another topic. Have a nice day.